Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next installment of The Recruiter of Oz.
Ooh, yes. Been waiting for this one all week.
So, how's everyone doing? We're here to talk more about the job seeking process and all of the do's and don'ts, pitfalls, and things to look out for. So, this week, we're going to talk about how to address job terminations or spaces in your work history.
Right. Because invariably that question comes up in one form or another. And, I've been finding this, Mark, get a little bit more invasive in terms of trying to answer this question. So I noticed that you've had this role here for a year and a half, and then you went to this role for 2 years. Why did you leave? And, when there's a reason that you don't want to really be open about why you left, usually just say it just wasn't a good fit. Right. But when you have a recruiter saying, well, so tell me really why did you leave? What are some of the reasons? What made you want to leave? And I'm like, oh, anyway,
you're like, they made me.
Right.
So
go ahead.
I think a couple things. I think now, whereas before this wasn't really done as much, but now there's like on a LinkedIn profile, there's all kinds of like explanations as to why there's a gap in your job. Like people are like maternity leave or paternity leave or recharge. And it's like a recharge of like 6 months. And it's like, well, right. It's great. You did a recharge. It's like, glad you could afford it.
Exactly.
Or you took a year off to go find yourself and go mountaineering on all, the highest mountain on each continent, like whatever it is, that's now becoming a more accepted thing. So that's good, because before, the companies and recruiters are still judgmental on those gaps, but at least it's becoming a little more accepted. And that's a good thing, because all of those are legitimate reasons.
Yeah.
And so I think, other reasons could be somebody had to take like a year off because they had to care for like a sick parent, right? It's like that type of thing will not get you any like work experience to like help you out through that period, because you're like so focused on whatever's happening at home. But it's still a valid and a legit reason. So it's becoming more and more accepted. It's not accepted by everybody, but that is a plus, I think, in all of this.
Oh, totally. But hey, the other thing I'm curious about, though, is, as you'd mentioned, it doesn't necessarily get you that valid work experience, but how do you basically get across to the recruiter or whoever you're speaking with that you've maintained your skills? Because I think that's the big question. Are you still relevant? Are you still up on current processes and whatnot? Because I know a lot of different functions will change and they'll progress and they'll change the way they do things. So as a sourcer and recruiter, what would you say if you had to account for a gap like that?
Yeah. So, if I was asking a candidate that now, one good thing a candidate can do is, yes, they're not working, but what did they do to keep up with their skills? So there's a lot of things that you can do. And so like right now, if you're watching this video and you're not working, so there's a bunch of things that you can do. There's plenty of free resources, plenty of free trainings that you can watch. There's ways to get like certifications that are related to your job. And getting those certifications can show that you're putting in the effort, you're trying to stay on top of things, and you're ready when you get the call. You're ready when the bat phone rings.
Absolutely. That's actually a great response, because that's one thing that I've employed as well over the past few months. I've been out, I think, since January. And LinkedIn Learning has kind of been a lifesaver. I don't really care about the certifications as much as I care about maintaining those skills and kind of understanding different perspectives, because even if you stay in a situation and you're doing a particular function, your skills can stagnate. So to be taking part in those events and those education opportunities is really valuable.
Yeah, and LinkedIn Learning is good. Those are some good ones to look at. And then anything that's related to like a specific certification, there are the ones that are like official ones. So let's say you were like a cybersecurity engineer or like some sort of like, threat assessment engineer. Well, then you might do an extra certification. It might cost you because there are certain, certain groups like, whatever it is, GRIC or something like that, where you have to, pay to get it. But still, doing that could just kind of help, up your skills, keep you in tune with what's going on, so that you're ready when you get the call.
Absolutely. And to that end, I mean, a number of companies will do that as well. So you have the Intels and Data IQs and company like that who have specific offerings that will offer certifications for free. So you have to go through and you have to take on their website, usually an academic area of their website or whatever, and they'll offer a course to accomplish certain things and achieve certain certifications, which is also pretty cool. I'd known about this a long time ago. I would have totally been doing these and would have probably had my doctorate by this point. Whatever.
So all of those like reasons are now becoming more accepted on like LinkedIn profiles. Those like explanations for gaps.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the same ones those are the exact same ones that you'll say if you get asked by the recruiter or the sourcer when you're interviewing.
Right.
They're gonna ask you, give them that answer, because again, those are becoming more accepted than they were maybe in the past.
Right. Absolutely. It shows that you've got the desire and you've got the discipline to do these things outside of a normal work situation. But Mark, the other thing that really I have a question about is, what if you don't really necessarily have a gap, but if a company will zero in, say you have a situation that you were around for 6 months and it was, in your mind that you should be putting that on your resume. Well, when an employer looks at that, they go, okay, 6 months, what's the deal with that? And unless you say contract or this is for a specified amount of time, you're going to have some splaining to do, yo.
Yes. So now let's say the job is only for like a month, then maybe I might leave it off. I mean, there's I don't know where the fine line is for like
right
keeping the job and leaving it off, but I do know that you should have like a good explanation for whatever the reason is, whether it's like reduction in force or, or maybe the role actually turned out to not be what you thought it was going to be. And you just went through it for 6 months. So when it comes to telling the source or recruiter the reason why you left a role early, that's okay. Now, I mean, there's a way to do it in a fashion that doesn't like disparage that former employer, because the company that you're trying to apply to, they're going to look at how you talk about your former employer, your former boss. So they're going to want a reason, but you're going to want to not go all in terms of like how unhappy you were, right? You can say like, it was not a good fit. They wanted me to do this, and it turns out I really did this. Or they said the job was going to be this, and when I got there, it actually wasn't that at all. So those things can be legitimate reasons. And
sure.
Yeah.
And generally accepted. But the thing is, what happens when you did have a situation that perhaps was really toxic? Okay. And there's nothing good that you really have to say about a company. So when as a sourcer and a candidate, Mark, if you're confronted with a situation like that, either calling it out on a candidate or as a candidate and trying to figure out, how to kind of navigate that, what do you do? I mean, because eventually there's going to be a sourcer or a recruiter who says, well, tell me about that. Because you can say, well, it's a good personality fit. They're going to ask, what does that mean?
Yeah. I mean, you could say like, the environment was toxic, or the environment was, was not represented as it was during the interview. Like, I mean, again, you don't want to get like don't get like too specific and like single out like your a person or something like that and say like, oh yeah, that person was a complete whatever.
Yeah.
Because again, that can come back to bite you.
Right.
So I would again say the environment was not right. The role was not right. It was not what it was laid out to be. Like, I mean, those kind of like things where it just was not a fit.
Okay.
And
So Mark, then I'm going to be taking the recruiter role right now. Okay. So you say that the role was not right or wasn't a good fit. Why wasn't it a good fit?
Right. So, you could say, like, for instance, the manager wanted this style of work, and that was not something that we had like agreed upon, or the manager, was like too much of like a micromanager, and you prefer to like, work in this style. Like, I mean, something where it's like, it's like clashing styles, or like not representative of what they promised you for what the work was. Something where like it was just not a clear match.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
So as a recruiter, does that give you pause when you talk to a candidate like that?
It might, if like the environment that you're interviewing for is exactly like that, then you might be like, oh, well, then you're not going to like it here. But then maybe they're doing you a favor. So again, that's why you don't want to like talk too badly about the previous employer, because again, you may be future burning bridges for where you might go.
Right. That makes a lot of sense.
So you be honest, but not too honest.
Right. Not too honest. Hashtag. So let's kind of extrapolate a little bit, because this is going to be, our dear listeners, a bit of an improv session right now, because we've kind of gone over the core stuff that we want to talk about. But what about a situation, Mark, where you bring in a candidate who looks like they have a lot of really good research, or research. Hello, maybe, but they have a lot of good experience. And they have multiple roles though. So they're a year, a year and a half, 6 months, 2 years, whatever, and they aren't specified contract. What do you do then? And what is your first inclination when you see something like that?
So that can be a problem for certain roles, especially. I wouldn't say all roles, but it can be a problem for certain roles. So at the last company that I worked at, the types of engineers that we hired were senior level engineers, like almost like director level engineers.
Right.
And they were like planning roadmaps and like responsible for mentoring all 25 engineers. So if they came to us and we saw like in an application, or we were sourcing and we saw they had like 6 months, a year, stuff like that, like we really couldn't think that they would be a fit because of the type of work that they would need to do and create for it to be relevant to what we were doing at our company. Right. They would need to be there for like years. It takes years at a role to like see something through, to come up with like a product roadmap and like see it through. You don't come up with a product roadmap and then see it through in like 6 months. Like that no, of course happen. Not. So the ones that we looked at were the ones where like they were there for like 4 years. The previous company they were at for 10 years. And like, we're like, okay, they stuck it out here. They like saw something through and they were doing the job. And those are the ones that we looked at. So, okay. Did we skip a bunch of candidates? Yeah, we did. But that's because like it would be impossible to gain the experience that they needed, that we were hiring for, in the shorter amount of time if they were jumping around.
That's interesting. And it's historically what I'm used to seeing as well. But you've got a zeitgeist within any given generation and the way they do their work. And so the new kind of focus here is gaining a better work-life balance and gaining more money faster. And to do that, I've seen this over the past couple of decades where the time from starting a new job to ending that job is really becoming compacted. So what I'm hearing now is that the best way to do this is to jump every 2 years to ensure that you're going to be able to get, that the most bang for your buck in terms of salary. Now, from the sourcer recruiter perspective, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, there are plenty of people who do that.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't mean that they're always successful. No. And also, sticking it out at a company for longer than that can be beneficial. Like, in other words, you're like an individual senior contributor. You're there for like 2 years and you're like, okay, I could jump ship. Or there's an internal position for a manager role.
Right.
Do I take it, or do I like try and look for something like with more money, not necessarily a higher level? So it depends on where you want to go in your career. And it also depends on the money piece. Some people, the money is important, but it's also the recognition. It's also like the bigger and better roles.
Right.
And also depends if you want to be like a people manager versus like an individual contributor. So like all of that factors into a decision why you might do that. But again, plenty of people, especially in recruiting, will be somewhere for like 2 years, and they're like, okay, I think I'm ready to get a raise, and then they'll look for a new role. Now that was of course not now. That was in the before times. So
Yeah.
now it's a little different, but that is something that people do.
And I'm just curious, though. I mean, is it frowned upon still by the recruiting set as much as it would have been back in like the 70s and 80s?
No, I mean, 2 years at a role, that's like acceptable.
That's enough to go through a couple cycles, and
that's acceptable. Yes, that's an acceptable thing. I mean, for most roles. Now, for somebody who's like a VP of marketing, 2 years, that means something maybe went awry, right?
Nah, that's the thing. So a lot of the VPs that I've been interviewing with, I've noticed, I always check their LinkedIn's beforehand, and a lot of them are just basically serial entrepreneur VPs. And they'll startup to startup to startup.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. I mean, it's no big deal. But the side note to that is that I've had one of those VPs look at my resume, and they'll see I was at a place for 2 years, one for 4, one for 3, one for 1, and they'll say, "So, what do you have to say about this job hopping?" And I looked at their LinkedIn and I said, "Well, what do you have to say about your job hopping? What do you say?" And I think that in my head, because, this is not an acceptable line of questioning against a potential hiring manager. But
you're like, don't call me a job hopper. You're a job hopper. Job hopper.
Pot, meat kettle. Nice to meet you. But yeah, so it's interesting. Now, on the other side of that coin, you've already alluded to it, because you want to see someone who has a good long history at a company and who has been through the ups and downs, ebbs and flows, and has been through cycle after cycle after cycle. Yeah. Now, in the new zeitgeist, right? And I hope I'm using that word correctly. I think I am. But in that new kind of paradigm, this is not something that we necessarily see. This is the exception, not the rule, where people will stay at a company for many, many years, because I think a lot of the view is that if a company is not going to be loyal to its employees, why should an employee be loyal to its, this company? Right. What do you see when you say a non-managerial, non-strategic role, but maybe someone who is very technical, or it's an important role, but it's not a high up role. What do you see when you see someone that has been in one of those roles for 10 to 20 years and then is out looking for another position? Is that an inhibitor?
It depends, because there are roles like let's say like a software engineer, and they work at like a huge 10,000 person plus company.
Yeah.
But they're just a software engineer for like 10 years. Now, that could be a number of reasons. One, they never made it past like level IC5 or something like that.
Yeah.
2, they did, but they just don't care to advertise it on LinkedIn. And so there are plenty of like super high level engineers that I've found that just don't advertise that they were promoted throughout the course of that 10 years.
Right.
So
then go back to the one that stayed at the same level. And I'm sure that would give you a little bit of pause. Okay, why haven't you progressed?
No, and again, that could be true. There are some people who purposefully do not take higher level roles, like managerial roles, stuff like that, because they don't want those extra responsibilities. And then there are the few that they do enough of the work, but they also don't have enough of the stuff to make it to those next levels.
Right.
So again, I think it's different situations. If they've been there for 10 years and they've legitimately been there for 10 years, they had something for the company kept them. Either that, or it was like a what's his name in the office where they in Office Space where he was on the payroll through an accounting error, right?
Yeah. I was told that I could listen to my radio at a reasonable volume between the hours of 9 and 11, at a reasonable volume, and that's my stapler. Milton, yes.
Milton, yes. So I think if the company employs them for that long, well, there's a reason why they're employed, whatever the reason is.
Whether it be accounting error or otherwise, yes.
Exactly, yeah. But again, not progressing like past like a certain point in like the chain doesn't necessarily mean that they were a bad employee.
Right. No, absolutely not. I think back to my dad, and he was at a big company for many, many years. I won't even mention the name, even though I've mentioned names here before. But he was with this company for 38 years. And I think he progressed a couple of times up to a materials engineer. And he had been offered many, many promotions over the years because he was really good at what he did. Thing was, he had a family and he had more of a priority in that side as opposed to working at a job and advancing through those ranks. Because I mean, really, sometimes that's just not satisfying enough or worthwhile to give up a lot of your life for what, that job is going to require. So there's another thing.
Yeah. So, yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool. So, I mean, I think those are all things that should be looked at. I think the thing to talk about is if, let's say you were not just laid off from like a job, but what if you were fired? Like, what do you say?
Right. Well,
you're like, what do you say? I mean, that's like a whole thing. So I would say that if a company asks you that, I would just say you could say you mutually parted ways. I mean, I wouldn't say that. I mean, it's up to you if you want to say that you were fired.
Yeah.
That could be a problem later in the hiring process or in that exact moment. But I think that you should make it more of like it was, difference of whatever, difference of opinion, difference of
right.
the way we were working, any of those things, because that could definitely, look bad for you.
So what you're saying, Mark, is that the proper answer is not, well, I got shit canned. What of it?
I mean,
so
maybe
that's not the right answer, you're saying?
I mean, maybe if it was like your first job at Baskin Robbins, then you could do that.
I flung ice cream at a customer.
Exactly. Yeah.
So good and sage advice there. But
yes,
it can be uncomfortable, though. I mean, and then there's also the situations where you honestly aren't clear whether you're being fired or laid off because of the way the company HR informs you of basically.
Which is true.
Right. So, I mean, in a situation like that, I think I would probably be, my role was eliminated. It just wasn't a good fit. And again, mutually parted ways. Fortunately, my let go was an elimination. It was clearly put as an elimination because they outsourced my function. But I was thankful for that. I was very thankful for that because trying to come up with something that is acceptable language on a fire, unless you've done something like super unethical, illegal, or otherwise just actually career harming.
Stealing trade secrets.
Right. Stealing equipment and selling it on the gray market. There are a lot of reasons why you can get fired, but there are some reasons that don't have to be really specified.
Yeah.
We don't like your face. We don't like you. We don't like how you dress. It can be, I mean, that's the problem with a lot of at-will employment states. They can fire you for any reason at any time.
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah. And so there was a huge layoff at our company, but I was the only one who got laid off. Huh. Interesting.
Yeah.
No, I mean, so you want to, be careful how you address those. Right. And when it comes to, unless the way that you got fired was like public knowledge, like in other words, unless it became like a mass like criminal case, for instance, like that.
Elizabeth Holmes.
Yeah, exactly. No, but I was just reading an article about an Apple engineer who was fired in, I think it was, I don't know, maybe 2018 or 19.
Okay.
But they're actually from China.
Oh.
And they got a job at Apple. They were one of the very select few people that had access to like all these like schematics and data for the Apple self-driving car.
Okay.
And so they worked there for actually a pretty short time, but then they eventually figured out that this person was like downloading bunches of like files and schematics and like code and stuff like that. Wow. And so they fired him, but then they had to get like a court order to like get to his house and then get the stuff off of his computer and an external hard drive. It was this whole news case, but it was on the news. So lying about. And then, by the way, this person took a one-way ticket to China. So
I'm sure
they're gone. But if it's something like that, well, then you could try and lie. But I mean, again, it's public knowledge. Now, this ties into background checks. When companies do a background check on you, let's say you make it all the way through the hiring process, they're going to do a background check on you. So
Right.
they're going to look at criminal. Some, depending on where you work, they may look at things like DUIs, right? They're going to look at any convictions. They're going to look at the
Credit.
Employment. Oh yeah, they're going to look at credit.
Yep.
But when they look at the employment, the only thing that they can legally ask a company when they do a background check is, did you work there?
Yep.
And then they ask when. And then the HR department replies back, yes, this person worked from here to here. The HR department is not allowed to tell them any more than that. So they're not going to say if you were fired. They're not going to say what the reason was, anything like that. If they do, they could get in serious legal trouble.
Absolutely. Hey, really quick question though. So as a candidate, it's something that has eluded me in terms of having visibility into this. And I finally asked a couple of times ago, what really goes on in a background check and what can they find out and ask? Because often when you fill out one of those background checks, they'll have you fill out the places you worked and and basically the dates you worked from at that place. Now, say you had a 3-month position that didn't work out and you chose to exclude that from a background check. Now, in my experience, I found that they don't even look for that company because you didn't list it on your background check. Was that true?
Yeah,
or?
I think that is true. It's been a while since I've done one of these. I think that's true, but again, our audience can confirm that. But I think that is true because they're really just confirming the ones that they're not looking at your job history. They're looking at these companies and if you were employed then.
Did you work where you say you worked at the times you said you worked there?
Yes. Okay. Now, none of this counts backdoor references, which are a completely different thing.
So go ahead and tell us what backdoor references are.
Yeah, backdoor references. So your official background check is, hey, did this person said they worked at your company? Did they work there from this date to this date? Yes. What was their job title? Great.
Yeah.
And that's it. Now, a backdoor reference is you're interviewing at a new company. The recruiter's like, okay, great, thanks. We want to move forward. We got to do a background check. Maybe they do this even beforehand, but that recruiter then goes to a friend of theirs at one of your previous companies and say, hey, what was it really like to work with Scott? And then that's when they get the quote unquote backdoor reference. And so that, of course, is not, I don't know, technically legal. I don't know what we can have people debate that, but that's where you get most of the information. So if you have somebody who you worked with before at that company, then that's where they find out the dirt, so to speak.
Right. And I think what word am I looking for? I'm looking it up right now just to make sure I don't say something that I'm going to regret. So that's called, on behalf of the company, plausible deniability. If they were not the ones, if they were not the ones who were asking those questions, but if one of their employees went out and heard that they were, interviewing a candidate, and they happened to have someone on the other side who maybe knew that candidate, if they made a call, it might be an interesting find out. And since that company isn't acting at all, especially in an official capacity, they really didn't have anything to do with it. And if that information somehow got back to the company's recruiters, well, I mean, it just kind of happens, right?
Yes, that is the word, plausible deniability. That's the phrase.
Yes.
Yeah. So that now, obviously, not every company you talk to is going to have somebody who works at every company that you've worked at before.
Right.
So unless you seriously burnt all the bridges as you went out the door, right, then that's not going to happen.
Right. Oh.
So that's kind of the insight on the kind of the references and how to address those spaces in your jobs.
That makes absolute sense. And so to recap this episode, given that we're pretty much at the end here, Mark, how to address job terminations in a productive and optimistic way without incriminating yourself.
Yes.
And so the bullet pointed examples, go ahead, run those off really quick.
Again, it could be wrong role. It could be wrong fit. It could be the work that was promised to you throughout the interview process turned out to not be that. And that happens sometimes.
Mhm.
Sometimes like the interview process, the selling of the company and the job turns out to really be good, and the job itself not so good.
Right.
It could also be the work environment was not the same. It could be the manager, right?
Right.
The manager style didn't kind of really like fit with yours because they were too much of this or not enough direction or too micromanaging. I mean, there's certain things you can say that are not like totally like disastrous and incriminating.
Right. Perfect. So there you have it from a horse's mouth. Mark, do you want to sum it up, or not sum it up, but take us out?
Take us out. Drum solo.
That would be me, but no, it's yours today, Mark.
Yes. So thank you for joining us on this episode of the Recruiter of Oz, and we will see you at the next one.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.